HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The New Crusades, Islamophobia and the Global War on Muslims, by Khaled A. Beydoun. Foreword by Kimberly Crenshaw. Read by Shah. Foreword. I met Khaled Beydoun in August 2001 during the UCLA School of Law's Special Orientation Program for Critical Race Studies students. Khaled came to UCLA Law to enroll in our program, the first and only one of its kind. Fresh out of college and hailing from Detroit, Khaled caught my attention, and I have not lost sight of him since. I had taught the nation's first critical race theory class at UCLA about a decade earlier. By 2001, the course had blossomed into a full concentration, with the onboarding of several colleagues of color with expertise in race matters and the law. 20 years ago, long before the massive reckoning around race and injustice that would take place in the spring of 2020 and galvanize millions of people all over the world to take to the streets in protest, critical race theory was an expanding body of knowledge reflecting the legal dimensions of racialization that impact many racially marginalized groups. A core observation that stretched across several projects attached to CRT was the notion that race and racism were not biologically based concepts, but socially constructed, partly by law. The effort to think, teach, and act through a CRT prism on racial power that transcended the narrow understanding of racism as merely prejudicial treatment based solely on skin color opened a world of possibilities to explore the dynamics of Islamophobia. Our program and its wider footprint were growing, but the reach of critical race thinking to Islamophobia was at that time only a possibility, a door left open by our anti-essentialist understanding of racism. Any subordinated group could be subject to racism. We knew this much. The particulars of these other racisms, how they function, what they are called, whether the analog to color blindness could be ameliorative, were questions that a practitioner and theorist might consider. Khaled was destined to turn this theoretical possibility into a reality. The 9/11 terror attacks and the war on terror coincided with Khaled's entry into law school, changing him and the entire world. Contemporary politics forged Khaled's journey to becoming a leading critical race theorist in the fast and furious slide into Islamophobic discourse and policy in 2001. In some ways, a sudden break with the religious chauvinism and cultural othering that characterized the pre-9/11 world was afoot. In other ways, the slide was continuous with the othering codes that described Muslims as suspect and unassimilable. As these dynamics unfolded, Khaled adapted CRT's analytic tools and interpretive prisms as tools in his journey to becoming one of the leading thinkers in naming, analyzing, and contesting Islamophobia. The student I came to know initially in my race, representation, and the law seminar was on a mission to fill intellectual voids and connect analytical dots with his unique blend of a Detroit fighting spirit and a broadening worldview. Khaled found himself directly immersed in the fire during the earliest stages of the war on terror, experiencing a unique analog of being criminalized for doing anything while black. Both Arab and Muslim, Khaled studied and learned the law during those bleak formative years of the war on terror from 2001 to 2004. His experience was formative in the ways that living in a discordant state of existence always is. The promises of formal equality under the law say one thing, but the exceptions allowed by a panoply of justifications for second-class treatment created something entirely different. Khaled was a student in several of my courses, and I intimately witnessed that for him, critical race theory and the law, Islamophobia, and intersectionality were not merely academic exercises or abstract ideas. They were tools, potent, practical tools, that he wielded as an activist and an intellectual. As his professor and mentor, and later on his colleague and friend, I witnessed Khaled evolve as a trailblazer in the critical race theory and Islamophobia fields, fusing disciplines and connecting discourses to elevate dimensions of Orientalism and Islamophobia that were grounded and institutionalized in and by law. Let me share a story. Days after the Bush administration declared war on Iraq, Khaled appeared in class noticeably rattled. He had a kafia on his bag and a look of concern on his face. Khaled had relocated to Los Angeles for school, but came from a city where Iraqis flocked in waves as refugees. He'd grown up alongside victims of wars new and old. And so when Edward Said, the prolific Palestinian intellectual, was set to speak on campus, Khaled lobbied not only for me to allow him to miss class to attend the lecture, but to require the entire class to attend. He was a strategist, an activist, and an intellectual, introducing his classmates to a trailblazing voice during a moment of unprecedented urgency and alarm. Not satisfied with the simple goal of mastering legal concepts or rules, he strove to create tools that could educate others and impact change. I was fortunate that Khaled urged our class to attend that lecture, which would be one of Edward Said's last. It was a gift to be on the receiving end of a masterful address and mobilization given by Said and Khaled, respectively. Edward Said died that same year, and it was clear how much the passing of such a heroic intellectual and truth-teller deeply affected Khaled. And at the same time, it was clear that Said's influence was like water to a seed, one uniquely situated to yield new fruit. So, I encouraged Khaled to write, to expand his observations, experiences, theorizations, and cautions about the world that the War on Terror had made and unmade, all under the imprimatur of law. He did so, and has not stopped, as the trenchant narratives you will hear in the following reveal. My confidence in Khaled, however, extended beyond the academic voids he could fill. After his graduation, I reached out to him as an organizer in the battle to preserve affirmative action in Michigan. Khaled's ability to speak from within and to serve as an effective interface between communities was crucial in galvanizing Muslim and Arab communities to find common cause with their black and brown neighbors. While the coalitions to preserve affirmative action could not overcome the coordinated efforts of well-resourced and highly organized factions bent on destroying it, the brainstorming, debating, and organizing that we pursued in partnership with the African American Policy Forum, AAPF, would deepen our understanding of the parallel and overlapping dimensions of Islamophobia. Khaled became a regular participant at AAPF's annual Social Justice Writers' Retreat, where he drew connections between the new frontier of American imperialism abroad and domestic campaigns of so-called counterterrorism and long-standing systems of racism against black people and sexism against women. Those retreats offered freestyle intellectual engagement, and Khaled's organic observations from those informal debates and observations would later appear in his books and articles. Muslims are being racially constructed as terrorists, he observed during one of our retreats, noting how the War on Terror was a global imperial project. These discussions often featured ideas that would later form the thesis of his subsequent publications, including his critically acclaimed first book, American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear. The importance of internationalism embodied in the new Crusades was similarly a central topic that participants discussed at length under the sweltering sun in Jamaica. In all of this, I learned that Khaled was a fighter, unafraid to stand his ground and fully commit to the battle at hand. By then, it was a foregone conclusion that his ideas had to be heard in a world that marked Muslims as the enemy. And while there were many ways for Khaled to amplify his voice, A career in legal academia offered a unique platform to uncover the multiple ways that Islamophobia, under construction by law, could be understood as natural and even essential. This kind of aggression in the name of self-defense is not new to the U.S. or elsewhere worldwide. Still, Khaled has adapted this dynamic to the particulars of the war on terror to create usable knowledge in the pursuit of freedom. In this respect, Khaled stands apart because he deftly connects American racial justice crises with parallel global concerns. The son of a single mother, Khaled and his family fled war to land in one of the poorest and most segregated cities in the United States. He experienced firsthand how American imperialism abroad delivered him into the belly of the beast, where systematic forms of discrimination faced by poor, black, and brown people are taken as natural facts of life. Khaled is Muslim, Egyptian, a Detroiter, and a son raised by a single mother during an era of citywide school shuttering, the crack epidemic, the undoing of affirmative action, and the dawn of the war on terror. While the latter has made the most vital imprint on his writing and public voice, the other dimensions of life that shape his perspective are evident in the soul and spirit of his work. Acknowledging the salience of intersectionality and structural inequality in his writing and worldview, he is deeply concerned about those living on the margins and the individuals often overlooked by commentators. As he notes, this narrative of global Islamophobia is at the delta of Crusades, old and new. Most fundamentally, this book centers on the voices of the very victims caught in the crucible of state-sponsored and prevalent Islamophobia. In the words of Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, those perilous middles are where Muslims are forced to live and strive to live free, or die like the trees, standing up. The New Crusades conveys that spirit of empathy. It sets Khaled's writing apart. Moreover, his commitment, his mission, is to make his work accessible to everyone. As a result, he has emerged as a leading public intellectual on matters tied to Islamophobia and critical race theory. As a scholar, his work on theorizing Islamophobia and its relationship with the law has been groundbreaking, and in many ways he has played a significant role in refining the term Islamophobia. His ability to shift from academic to public scholar to activist makes Khaled's work indispensable. The New Crusades is an intersectional milestone. It lucidly illustrates how converging systems of subordination, power, and violence related to Islamophobia are experienced across the globe. For example, Uyghur Muslim women locked away in Chinese prison camps must endure the intersecting fury of torture and sexual violence rooted in a genocidal project that rips them from their children. Their Islamophobic intersection, if you will, is dramatically unlike that of a French-Algerian male in Paris, whose masculinity is marked with the suspicion of terrorism in a liberal state that criminalizes headscarves worn by his mother or sister. Dimensions of the global Muslim experience that Khaled understands well and brings to life in this book. Race, gender, location, the form of government in a host nation, and so much more determine the circumstances that Muslims occupy in countries across the globe unified by a war on terror that spreads Islamophobia beyond borders and across intersections. Khaled elevates the voices and experiences of the victims of Islamophobia. He reveals the stunning heterogeneity of how Islamophobia is imposed and experienced. Repeatedly, his eye turns toward the furthest margins and to the most vulnerable intersections that many of his contemporaries neglect. The Somali widow blinded by a relentless sun and forced to live between CIA surveillance and local terror groups. the young Rohingya widow swept from the ethnic cleansing in Myanmar to poverty in Chicago, or the dynamic Uyghur activist in Turkey who champions the cause of his people, although each word he utters, every post he publishes, may endanger his family members in China. Khaled fuses these disparate stories of Islamophobia into a compelling and cogent whole. The New Crusades is a text about humanity that maps the furthest margins of Islamophobia, while centering the voices of the most ignored victims of intersecting fronts of global subordination. This book is a masterful embodiment of the way in which critical race thinking and intersectionality are moving toward an overdue reckoning with Islamophobia. Introduction. 2 Tuesdays. Sometimes you can sense that something terrible has taken place. You just know it. The ringing and vibration of your phone doesn't let up. It rings and rings, and after you silence it, it shakes and shakes. In these moments, turning it off seems the best option, but doing so would disconnect you entirely. So it rings, then shakes, shakes, and rings, until those familiar sounds form a spell-binding shrill that shouts what the weight of the mood silently whispers to you. You don't want to hear it, but you can't help it and can't ignore it. The force is relentless, and that feeling stretches itself in every direction. It fills every corner of the room, and everything within it, and within you. Its urgency, amplified by the non-stop shaking and buzzing of that black device that you watch from a short distance, summons you toward it. That black mirror, which keeps you connected to people and places far beyond, while simultaneously trapping you inside its four corners, becomes the messenger of news you don't want to receive. News you've heard before, which stalks you and stalks you at every turn of life. That feeling lords over you before you know what event or incident triggered it. It orders you, simultaneously, to run toward it and heed its message, and to avoid it at any and all costs. This existential paradox fixes upon you for moments that feel like forever, stopping life as you know it, and reminding you, although you have hardly forgotten, that your life is defined more by these enigmatic moments than those passing, prolonged stretches that parade as routine life in the spaces between. These are New World warnings, the stalking shadows of our brave New World that digitally blur distances geographic, real, and surreal. A world where the devices we faithfully carry in our palms are at once mechanisms of ongoing surveillance and machines of doomsday warnings. At 11:43 a.m. on August 4th, 2020, the non-stop shrill of that phone finally won me over. I walked over to it and then opened up a Pandora's box of messages from friends and family. Beirut has been bombed, and did you make sure Abudi and his kids are okay? Seconds later, I opened files of videos and images that, with gruesome color and lucid horror, confirmed the texts. The visuals verified that the city that was home to so many family and friends, and that I called home during a stretch of my childhood, had been targeted by what seemed to be a foreign airstrike, or, as some reported, a terror attack. I continued to scroll through my phone, watching a bleak roll of images and videos sent by family and friends, mixed with real-time posts strangers shared on social media. This is a dystopian custom in our bleak new world. Tragedy, in all of its morbid detail, is instantly disseminated and explicitly conveyed on our small mobile screens, even as it is still unfolding. The reels rush in real time, without stopping, and oftentimes without filter or forewarning. Time froze, and I stood there fixed along with it, absorbing surreal scenes of streets I knew so well, in a city seated deep in my heart, a place where our apartment building on Beydoun Street was submerged by the gray smoke from the explosions and the ghosts of faded memories, a place where only 12 months earlier my mother and I walked to family visits, to restaurants, and took evening strolls to maintain strength in her aging legs, only miles from the port where the explosions detonated and brought Beirut back down to its war-torn knees. Explosions that, in that apocalyptic aftermath that Beirut knew so well from wars past, revealed that more than 200 people were killed, 300,000 people were left homeless, and more than 100,000 homes were destroyed. For a nation pitied for its modern misfortunes with war and the internal rifts that sink it even deeper, the Beirut blasts revealed that terror is an enterprise not tied to any one faith or non-faith. While news outlets and pundits pushed us to blame the catastrophe on the familiar list of Muslim networks, in line with war on terror impulses, the truth revealed that global crusade's fundamental lie, that terrorism is a uniquely Islamic enterprise. Sometimes terror is a consequence of corruption, negligence, and as this book illustrates, religious and even secular ideology. More than often, terror is the outcome of old empires and their modern successors, chiefly the United States, my country, which occupies the citadel of neo-colonial wars on terror, and the new crusades they have spawned. Flashbacks of memories, recent and those rooted in my childhood, juxtaposed with the reel of horrors I absorbed from my cell phone screen. Sometimes you just get that feeling, that eerie feeling in the pit of your stomach that looms on the other side of those text messages that you have yet to open, or those incessant phone calls a voice inside orders you to avoid, is what you already know. Not knowing in terms of collecting all of the facts and appreciating what has actually taken place, but that deeper, metaphysical knowing, a knowing not spurred by detail or evidence, but memory and trauma. Trauma and memory, the two legs of that shadowy feeling that rips through your gut and stirs the fear and anxiety that grip your head and hold your heart. I felt that feeling for the first time on the morning of September 11th, 2001, the day that spawned the War on Terror, and that feeling it permanently seated within me. From that Tuesday onward, and the countless days in between, that feeling has swelled in line with the 20-year-old war, and evolved into a forlorn companion I have come to know as well as I know myself. In fact, that feeling has become part of who I am, as a Muslim, an American, a scholar, a public intellectual, a son, every dimension of an identity contoured by it since that tragic Tuesday in September, more than 2 decades ago. That feeling, which at first felt foreign, but evolved into familiar companion, is hardly mine alone. Rather, it is one that lives within and walks alongside 2 billion Muslims all over the world. It, on Tuesdays and days before and beyond it, rumbles and pulsates like that mobile device on my dining table, signaling the occurrence of another disaster in a city that raised my father and houses so many family members and friends. It stalks us from afar, then comes menacingly close when disaster strikes. This was a disaster I felt in my core before hearing word of it. That feeling I experienced for the first time that dark Tuesday morning on September 11, 2001, loomed over me and over those tragedy-stricken Beirut streets again on the Tuesday morning of August 4th, 2020. 2 Tuesdays, 2 mornings on opposite sides of the world, on distinct sides of a war on terror, which stand as permanent signposts of an evolving sense of difference spawned by it. 2 Tuesdays that for me serve as bleak bookends of a narrative about Islamophobia that was no longer isolated to one country or one population alone, but had become a global phenomenon, a phenomenon that ripped across man-made borders and the divides of time, one morbidly fused together by technology, while pushed forward violently by new empires spearheading new crusades against Muslims in Lebanon, the United States, and the world over. The world was not the same place on August 4th, 2020, that it had been on September 11th, 2001. In fact, it was irreversibly and unmistakably different. But so was I. I was no longer an anonymous Muslim American student sitting on the sidelines as disaster unfolded in New York City and Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania. I was now a law scholar and public intellectual recognized for his work on law, critical race theory, the war on terror, and more profoundly, Islamophobia. My first book, American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear, connected global audiences with my academic work and helped me launch a term I helped shape into a trenchant tool wielded by students and activists, scholars and non-scholars. The war on terror changed the world, but it also indelibly altered my trajectory and shaped who I am. Despite my best efforts to pursue other paths, the weight of this war and the new world order it ushered in pulled me in, and I was helplessly submerged by it. I could not stand on the sidelines, even if I wanted to. People looked to me to make sense of senseless disasters that fell upon Arabs and Muslims. Members of my faith community, in particular, sought me out to make rational and intellectual sense of that very feeling that shook through them when crises rattled cities like Boston or Beirut, New Delhi, or New York, and to predict what those events that implicated or impacted Muslims spelled for them and their loved ones. The feeling that moved through me on that Tuesday in September, 21 years ago, and countless days after that, is that unseen front of Islamophobia experienced by every Muslim. However, Islamophobia as a subject of academic study is, as it stands, bereft of that feeling and the first-hand experiences of Muslims on the ground. The human condition of Muslims and the countless intersections they occupied in the world remade by the war on terror was absent from academic literatures. In turn, Muslims were essentialized as terrorists or targets, faceless culprits of violence, or voiceless victims of state aggression, flattened on the pages of academic treatises and newspapers without the rich color of first-hand testimony we experienced off of them. Islamophobia can be rationally theorized and configured into a system of popular and state-sponsored bigotry, and this is the approach I took in my first book. Scholars interrogating Islamophobia on the domestic front, including sociologist Eric Love, root American Islamophobia in its host nation's history and contemporary systems of racism. This position is echoed and expanded by law scholar Sahar Aziz, who pays close attention to American constitutional principles, most notably the religious freedom safeguarded by the First Amendment, to challenge Islamophobia in the United States. Both Love and Aziz build on a rich literature that conceives of Islamophobia as an emanation of American racism, with the war on terror racializing Muslims as the terrorist other. The work of these scholars, and many others, has expanded the discourse on Islamophobia's relationship to racism, particularly American racism. But as the war on terror spun distinct myths in different countries, and the world spun along with it, an understanding of Islamophobia untethered from the American experience, its distinct...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?